Greetings, everyone, and welcome to tonight's virtual author discussion for Chaucer's Books with Olivia Seltzer, the author of CRAM This Book, So You Know WTF is Going On in the World Today. My name is Michael Takeuchi, and I'm the events coordinator at Chaucer's Books, a 47-year-old independent bookstore located in Santa Barbara, California. To purchase CRAM This Book or browse other titles or check out our upcoming events, please go to our website at chaucersbooks.com. Speaking of events, we're finally opening up again to in-store signings, and we hope to include tonight's guests amongst those next month. And we're going to start off on February 24th with local author Rodelae Weininger, who will talk about her latest book, Heart Medicine, on the 24th at 5:30 p.m. While our guests and I are the only ones seen and heard on this webinar, please feel free to utilize the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen. Tonight's event is being simulcasted and recorded for our YouTube channel and will be available after program's completion. And if you are on YouTube, which many of you are, please post any questions you have in the chat, and we hope to get to those as well. So let's begin. As soon as I push the little record button here, and then we will start. All right. As a former journalist, I can get pretty addicted to the news. I usually have 4 or 5 outlets I check on every couple of hours. And recently I have had to count another website, the CRAM, amongst this group. It's a very impressive website service that serves 113 countries and 6 continents. And it was all built by our guest tonight, the founder of the CRAM, Olivia Seltzer. So come on out, Olivia. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. Since starting this service shortly after the 2016 presidential election, before she was even in high school, Olivia has written over 500 newsletters for the CRAM, spoken at NATO Engages and the IFTF Summit, been featured in NPR, Teen Vogue, Today, The Economist, and Forbes, among others. She's been selected as 3-Dash Global Teen Leader and a Diller Teen Awardee. She's traveled to different college campuses around and started a grassroots movement to educate the world's future. Now, a few years later, she's a wise old news person, recently graduated from Santa Barbara High School, accepted at Harvard University. And we're here to talk about CRAM This Book, So You Know WTF is Going On in the World Today. Joining Olivia in tonight's discussion is Aurora Lydia Dominguez. Come out, Aurora. Hello. Aurora is a journalist, high school teacher, and college professor based in Hollywood, Florida. A journalist at heart, she's worked for places like the Miami Herald and J14 magazine as a reporter and editor before going from the newsroom to the classroom. She's currently contributes articles for Book Riot, a monthly YA roundup with Frolic Media, and as a reviewer for YA at Booklist. Please welcome Aurora.
Thank you so much for having me tonight with Olivia. I'm so excited.
That's great. I'm just going to zoom out of here. I'll monitor the questions. Please free to ask as you go and take it away, you two.
Awesome. Hi, Olivia. Welcome. I'm so excited to be joining you tonight. I feel like, especially as an educator and former journalist, I feel like the CRAM is extremely important. I also feel like as a teacher in my high school environment, teaching 10th grade, who teaches research and writing, one of the things that my students focus on a lot is current events. Mm-hmm. What is going on in the world? And I make sure they find the time to educate themselves on that because it's important. Like you said, they need to know what is going on. So to start the night, for any viewers who are not familiar with your experience and with the CRAM, can you tell us what inspired its creation?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you. So basically, I started the CRAM after the 2016 US presidential election because I attended a junior high school where the majority of the students were Latinx, and many of their parents were actually undocumented immigrants. And my own grandfather being an undocumented immigrant from Mexico, I also felt very connected to what was going on in the news. So there suddenly was a lot of talk about what was going on in the world, a lot of kind of sudden feelings that what was happening in our government was very much tied directly to us as young people. But I also noticed that none of us were actually reading or watching the news because it's primarily written by and geared toward an older demographic. And unfortunately, it just really wasn't connecting. Like, try watching the news and you'll see ads for fighting hair loss, which is not necessarily a problem right now for my age group. Since I saw that as a huge problem because my whole thing is you can't change the world unless you know about it, which sounds like a very simple concept, but it's true. If something is going on in the world that we don't know about, we don't really have the power to try to make it better. So I had always loved writing. So I was like, okay, why don't I try to create the solution to this? So on February 1st, 2017, I used money for my 13th birthday and for my bat mitzvah to like buy a domain name for the CRAM and send out my first newsletter. And I had to like teach myself how to build a website. And I've continued it every single day. And since then we've grown to 2.5 million monthly viewers across all platforms. And now CRAM, this book is here.
That is so exciting. And I feel like what you just said is so true. The fact that people that are younger, like you said, they're not going to relate to the type of content giving to them in just a regular, like a normal news site, in the sense that the ads, they're not relating to them and everything. Yeah. And you want to make sure they get that information because they need to be informed about what's going on in the world. So when it comes to the CRAM and that amazing inspiration that you have behind it, I'm from Puerto Rico and I have a lot of friends. Like, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. I have a lot of friends and students and just people in my life that are from the background you mentioned. So speaking about that, do you feel like that background and those people inspired you for the CRAM, and what inspired the book itself, the release of the book?
So like going further back in my family history, my great-grandparents were Jews living in the Soviet Union during the pogroms. So they were forced to flee to escape the mass killings of Jews, and they became religious refugees. They settled in Mexico. My grandfather was born in Mexico City. He grew up speaking Yiddish and Spanish. He unfortunately couldn't complete his college education in Mexico because his family didn't have enough money. So he immigrated to the United States, where he survived as an undocumented immigrant for many months before being fortunate enough to gain citizenship. So having those twin ties of like immigration, which is obviously such a hot topic affecting so many lives around the world every year, and then also anti-Semitism, which has been on the rise in recent years. I think that was a really big driving factor in my life, and it kind of gave me the sense. Obviously, I always felt very privileged, and I think I went about life for a long time being very naive. I kind of thought, even though I was Jewish, that anti-Semitism had been solved and that I knew the Ku Klux Klan existed, but I thought it was this like fringe thing that had no real influence. And then when I was like 12, 13, and I remember there were like a series of anti-Semitic incidents. One specific one where people painted on subway stations in New York, "Jews belong in the oven." And I was like, okay, whoa, like this is still something that's going on. And I felt really an obligation and responsibility to do what I can to make the world a better place. So that was a really big driving factor for why I felt compelled to start the CRAM. And it contributed to why I then felt compelled to write CRAM this book. The biggest inspiration behind CRAM this book is really that I felt that from all of my experience writing the news over the years, that there really is this assumption in the news that we all have understanding of the major events that have happened over the past century or so. But in reality, a lot of us don't. And it can make it really hard to grasp what's going on in the world today. So I wanted to write a book that actually gives us the background to the current events shaping the world today. in an accessible, digestible, and engaging way. So we all have the tools and power we need to come together and make the world a better place.
I love that because I feel like a book like the CRAM and just the CRAM altogether, I feel like it's perfect to educate as well. Not to mention, as a teacher, I feel like this is the type of information that I want my younger students to learn, not to mention not just my younger students, but my college students too, because it's just like you said right now, the fact that like there's so much information out there. And it can be overwhelming for them, and they might not have the time to click through all the stories and get through all the stories. And I'm sure you know this as well, but not everything that's out there is a reliable source. So you're a great person to show them what important information is out there for sure. So speaking of that, when it comes to the CRAM, the book, based on your experience, was there a section or a few sections that you really enjoyed digging into and writing, and why?
I mean, gosh, I just enjoyed the whole process so much. I really did. I had wanted to like actually have a published book my whole life. Even before the CRAM, I was like, I want to be an author when I grow up. So the whole experience was like even better than I had possibly expected. But to actually answer your question and not take the easy way out by just saying it's all good.
Right. Yeah.
I really, oops, I moved my computer. I really liked the sections where I felt I didn't know very much about it before. So I wasn't coming into it with any expectations or any pre-existing perspective, because those were the hardest ones to write, where I already had an opinion, but I was like, I can't let my opinion get in the way of this. So I really enjoy delving into like ableism, for example, because I feel like that's not something that is really talked about as much or thought about as much as one of like the main prejudices. There's always a lot of talk about sexism or racism, which of course are very important and pressing, but I feel like ableism gets often swept a little bit under the rug. So for me, like actually doing a lot of research on that and actually realizing how much ableism affects every aspect of society. Like I was watching The Sting the other night, and the villain in it has a limp. And my mom was like, why does he have a limp? And I was like, ableism. Like they always make the villains have limps or have eye patches or things like that. So that was an interesting thing for me to actually realize that I actually was able to learn from the book as I was doing the process of researching.
Love that. And I love that you say the word researching and that you were very much in that focus, in the sense that you wanted to make sure you researched everything before you were able to kind of put it out there in the world. And at the same time, like you said, sometimes it's hard when you have an opinion and you're like trying to like set yourself away from that opinion when you're writing. So did you also face any sort of challenges as you were creating this book? And I'm not saying necessarily a negative challenge, but something that made you grow, or something that you kind of understood throughout the process that kind of you learned from? Because I feel like as writers, we learn as we go along. So was there something that kind of clicked or kind of like was a little light bulb as you were working on this project?
Yeah. I came into the book wanting to show the connection between events that have happened in the past and events that have happened today. But as I started accumulating these stories and researching them, I realized that almost everything mentioned in the book is connected to everything else in the book, not even just current events. Like the entire section of the wars, almost every event in there actually stems from World War II, ranging from the Cold War to the Korean War to the Vietnam War to Israel-Palestine, which I think is something that I certainly didn't realize. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize either. So I thought actually getting to see that ripple effect and to let that play out in the book was a really interesting experience.
I like that. And it's so true. The connection of history to today, like that is just a huge connection. And as you were writing, talking about that, besides a favorite section, did anything kind of surprise you while you were researching or writing this book when it came to the creation of the product?
I think I was surprised by, I think how well the design elements turned out, because
nice. Okay.
I am not an artistically minded person, but I came into this book like at all. I can't draw a straight line, but I came into the book knowing that I really wanted it to be the kind of thing where you could open it up and every page would have some sort of visually engaging element, because I didn't want people who weren't familiar with the CRAM to see the book, open it up and think it was just another history textbook,
Yes.
because that's definitely not the idea. So I had all of these ideas that I came up with for what I wanted to do. Like for the section on oil spills, I wanted the whole page to be black and covered like it was oil. Or for the section on fires, I wanted the edges of the pages to be like charged and singed and things like that. And I didn't know, or like for the civil rights movement, I have like a Greyhound bus moving back and forth over the whole thing. So I wanted all of these elements throughout, and I didn't know if it would be something that could actually happen, or if it would turn out the way I had hoped and envisioned. And I was really pleasantly surprised that pretty much everything I came up with actually made it into the book. And I was able to work with a really talented illustrator named Eden. She is another 18-year-old. She actually went to high school with me.
Love that.
And she did all of the beautiful illustrations throughout the whole book. So that was a really cool process too, getting to actually have the book be completely made by young people.
I love that. And when it comes to that process and that inspiration, and I think about this as an educator as well, but what do you hope young people that are learning everything that they can learn right now, let it be in school, beyond school, and life, what do you hope they take away when they read this book and get all this information that is so important for them? What do you hope they take away as a younger person? Maybe they'll be more enlightened, maybe they'll grow in the process. What do you hope they take away from it?
Yeah, I mean, a few things. Like I mentioned before, I think a really big theme of CRAM this book is connection, both the connection between these events to what's going on today, and also the connection that these events have to us. Because I think as a young person, often we do feel very disconnected from what's happening in the news, and it's hard for us to understand how it maybe connects to us and directly affects us. And I think it's made even harder by the fact that we don't exactly have a direct hand in making political decisions because we can't vote. Like I've been doing the CRAM for 5 years now, and I just turned 18. Like I can just now vote. So that was many frustrating years of being like, I really want to vote, but I can't. Yeah. So yeah, that's a really big takeaway I want. And I really want young readers in particular, but really anyone to actually feel like they've been pulled into the story, into these major events, and feel like they understand and can see how these events affect us, but also how we can affect them. Because at the end of the day, as we move through the wars and the disasters and these terrible things tearing our worlds apart and that have torn our world apart, I think it comes to the understanding that it's always solved by connection. And when we actually come together to try to find solutions and make the world a better place. And I think a lot of that is seen in this section, The Movements, which delves into all of the social political movements of the past 100 or so centuries, 100 or so years that have continued to really affect society today.
Love it. And from your background and your inspiration as a recent graduate, because you told me you recently graduated high school.
Yes.
When it came to your experience as a student, like you said, you mentioned it, you said, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to have a published book. So I kind of have like a general question for you. Were there some classes that you enjoyed more than others? Number one. Number two, did you have any educators that inspired you in the process and friends that you met along the way? And how do you feel that kind of incorporated into your experience today?
Yeah, I was always the kind of person who really loved school. My parents like instilled in me like the value and privilege of education. I always loved history classes. Those were my favorite, especially the kinds where like you get that really great history teacher that makes everything a story. And that was also part of my inspiration for the book, because you would read history textbooks. And as someone who loves history, I'd be like, this is so boring. I can't read this. But then the teacher would teach
it up. Yeah.
yeah, but then the teacher would teach it like a story. And then I'm like, oh, okay, I get this. Like now I feel like I'm brought. So that was a big part of what I wanted to do with the book. So that was like, and I just love those classes so much. And then, yeah, there were a lot of people who really were important to the making of the book. I had the privilege to speak to dozens of experts, journalists, professors, who actually kindly went through and fact checked the whole book and gave notes and insight and things that they thought I should add to kind of bring more nuance and make it more balanced. And that was also a really incredible process to actually hear from all of these like amazing people in their fields.
I love that. And I feel like that's such a co-creative process.
Yeah.
You get all that feedback, because not only are you creating, but you're also learning from the feedback.
Yeah, exactly.
And when it comes to messages behind the CRAM, I know we've spoken about this right now, about the ideas and what you wish people would take away from the book. But if you were to describe the whole experience of the CRAM and the book, what messages and what information do you hope people take away when they have a chance to dive in and really study the CRAM and get to know the content?
Yeah. I mean, my whole like sort of mission statement with the CRAM, separate of CRAM, this book is educate to activate, but that really does apply to the book as well. My goal is to put that information out there and then actually show people and help people feel empowered, that they actually have a voice and have the ability to create change. Because that's like the biggest thing I've learned from this whole process is I was like this super shy, socially anxious kid who admired like all of these incredible youth activists who were going out and like leading speeches and marches and things like that. And I was like, I can't do that. Like I'm an introvert. I can't do that. And then I started the CRAM and I was like, wait, I am doing that. Like everybody I think has the ability to really like take a look at what they enjoy doing for fun in their life. Like for me, that was writing, and then actually figure out a way to apply that to a cause.
Love that. And when it comes to generally, when it comes to diving into content, you as a person, as a student, as a human being, usually what's your routine when it comes to getting your information? I know a lot of my students, they're very honest with me when I ask them about content, and they tell me they get a lot of their content digitally, right? For example, because I come from that kind of like generation that back in the day, we had the printed newspaper that would be tossed in somebody's front lawn, or the magazines and just kind of like the print copies. But now we're living in a very technology driven vibe. So obviously, I feel like my students get their information mostly from places like social media, or they'll wake up in the morning and check the news. Yet, here's the cool thing. They're also really into books now, believe it or not, which I think is so exciting. The fact that they're just not getting their information from online content, but the fact that online content, like say TikTok and Snapchat, is leading to reading and books and being informed. So with that said, where do you enjoy to get your content, and how do you feel about that? The fact that now we're seeing this generation that people would say back in the day, oh no, they're done with print. But at the same time, you go to a Barnes and Noble and people are picking up print. You go to an indie bookstore, you go to like the local bookshop across the street, and these kids are not just reading online, they're also picking up printed content. So how do you feel about all that? I think it's exciting. I think it's exciting that there's those two spectrums, right? Like there's that experience right now. So how do you feel about that? And how do you feel about the future of information?
Yeah, I mean, big question. Like generally, I think it's so exciting. I think the expansion of media is always exciting because
Yeah.
it brings up new opportunities and it increases access and things like that. I mean, personally, in research for the CRAM and even for CRAM this book too,
Definitely. Mhm.
it was completely digital. So every morning when I um, am reading the news to research for the day's news, I basically go to every news outlet out there.
Beautiful.
Like
Beautiful.
name it, I visit it. And I even read like the same exact news story on multiple
Yes.
different news outlets just to make sure I'm getting
That is
like
so
as broad and global perspective as possible.
Mhm.
And then like my dad, he gets like the New York Times and the LA Times every day, like an actual paper.
Nice. So you get like you get both the experience.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah.
But I think that it also, I definitely agree that there has been this sort of resurgence in people my age really gravitating towards like actual print books like that you can hold.
So neat. I love
And
that. Yeah.
yeah, I think that it really is like due to the pandemic, to be honest, because
Yes.
I think that, yeah. Honestly, the pandemic is the reason why Cram This Book exists in the first place, because I had always wanted to write a book, but I was like, I'm in school all day. Like, I do not know how this is going to
How do
work
I
out.
do this?
Yeah. So then when the pandemic hit, I was like, okay, one, like, this is obviously awful, everything happening in the world. And it felt very heavy. I felt very weighed down by it. But I was like, school is canceled. All of these speaking events and traveling that I was supposed to do was canceled, which I was super upset about. But I was like, what's one way I can actually try to use this new time home to my advantage? And that's really how Cram This Book was born. And as I was like, okay, if I actually could write a book and get a book deal and write a book that actually continued my mission of wanting to educate and activate young people and everyone,
yes.
then I would feel like okay, this time has purpose for me.
I think that's magical because we all went through it as
Mhm.
students and educators in the sense that we were home and we were like, okay, here we go from a classroom. Now we're behind a digital screen. We're home. We have more time. And I feel like a lot of creativity came out from that time.
Mhm.
Yes, it's been a tough time. We've all been through so much, but I've seen some amazing creative endeavors. And like you said, I am so excited to see that not only young people are picking up digital media, but they're being inspired by digital media to pick up print. And
Yeah.
I feel like there's a nice balance there. And I'm very excited about that. So when it comes to reading, besides what you're inspired by, is there anything that you are reading right now that's kind of cool, or anything that you're looking forward to reading? Any favorite authors, books, um, anything that kind of inspires your day by day?
Yeah. I mean, my all-time favorite book is The Dreamer. Like I go back to it every year. I love that book. I first read it when I was really little, but it still is my favorite book. And then right now, I just finished Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. I love that book.
Ooh,
It's so good. Yeah,
fantastic.
so good. Yeah, and then but that's actually one of the rare nonfiction books that I read, which is interesting considering the book that just came out today that I wrote is nonfiction. But I feel like I spent so much time reading the news and reading like super heavy topics.
Yeah, sometimes you need an escape. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. That at the end of the day, when I want to like consume media, I'm like, I really just want to read something light and fun. So right now I'm reading The Guncle, which I'm loving so far.
Adorable.
Yeah, I just started it. It's so good. And everyone was recommending it.
Beautiful. We all need those little like book. Obviously I contribute to Book Riot and I'm a journalist that reviews books. So I feel like you said, like what you just said is so important. The sense that yes, we're reading the news and you're an author that is kind of, you are giving people the news in a different package with your knowledge, your inspiration, your background, but we all need that little escape, right? Like to read a fun book here and there. So yeah, that one looks amazing. I've heard about that one as well.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask one more question before we head to Q&A, which I know they're going to be hosting. I know there's always people that are kind of eager to ask a question or two. But when it comes to the future of the CRAM and just what's coming up in the world in general, what do you hope to see happen in the future of the CRAM now that this book has been released? Like, what are some of your goals? in the future? I know that's a big question for any person your age or even my age, but what are some things that you hope to see happen? Let it be with the CRAM and what's happening next in the world.
Yeah. When I started the CRAM, I was immediately like, I want to create a media empire for young people. And I was 12. So I definitely did
That's
not have
amazing. Yeah, I love that.
I definitely did not have the resources to actually carry that out. But I was like, at least I can kind of get started on that goal by like waking up every day and writing the news and putting it out there and beginning to grow an audience and sort of cement myself within this space and start learning. So that still is my goal with the CRAM is I would really love to expand on the current newsletter format and create a 24-hour live news site for young people, by and for young people with correspondents and journalists all over the world. And then also really delve into like the visual and audio space because my forte is really the editorial, like the writing, but I think that there is just such potential to have news on other platforms that Gen Z is on.
Oh my God, that's amazing. And before I hand it over to Chaucer's Events for the Q&A, I just wanted to say you're very inspiring. And I am honestly so happy for you and congratulations on the release of the book. As an educator, there's nothing besides being a journalist that has been like at newsrooms, there's nothing that makes me happier than seeing young people like you that have this amazing aspiration and are reaching these goals to reach other people. So congratulations. And I'm so happy that I had a chance to chat with you tonight.
Thank you so much. That really means the world to me.
No,
And it's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Amazing. So guys, I see some questions. So now they will be, hi, welcome back. Such a great conversation. So I'm gonna kind of mute myself and hide myself so you can moderate the questions. Olivia, thank you so much. Such a pleasure.
So somebody wanted to know, Olivia, what do you like better, writing or do you like coordinating the other writers to creating the CRAM news?
Can I say both? Is that kind of cheating? I don't know.
That's fine.
I love writing so much. Writing is my favorite thing in the world. And just over time of doing the CRAM, it's just a bigger and bigger part of it has really been the people involved. So they're called the CRAM fam. So it's a group of about 500 young volunteers from all over the world.
Wow.
Hopefully some of them are watching now. And they're all like the most incredible, wonderful people. Many of them have become my closest friends, some of my closest friends. And what's been so inspiring about them is like, I know I have this drive and this passion for the CRAM, and it's something that I've started. But they have like an equal amount of drive and passion for it and for wanting to build it and grow it. And that has just been like the most incredible part of it. So I like that just has been like really my favorite part for sure.
Well, you went from being a one-person act to all these people. How did that grow to something so huge?
Yeah, it was really grassroots. So after a few months of writing the CRAM, I started having young people reach out, some of whom wanted to be journalists, others of whom wanted to find ways to spread the CRAM to other people, some of whom are amazing graphic designers, and some of whom have like really cool social media skills. And they all were really eager to figure out ways to help. So I created this kind of ambassador program called the CRAM Fam and set up a social media team, an editorial team, a media team, and an organizing team so people could get involved. And over time, it's just continued to grow and grow with like hundreds more volunteers all the time.
And it just seems like it was so natural, though, unlike a corporation or something, they forced their way to build these things. But it just, that's what I liked about it. It just seems like it's very organic and it just grew in that sense.
Yeah.
Really interesting stuff. Somebody wanted to know, you're working so hard at this. Are you able to recognize and appreciate the impact you and everyone else have made around the world? I mean, this seems really huge.
Well, thank you. I do. I try to really like stop and think about it all the time and like appreciate all that I've been able to do. I don't really like having like, I don't ever like using the word success or having any traditional markers of success, because I feel like constantly everybody's comparing themselves to everybody else, and there's always more you could be doing. And that's just not like a healthy mindset to be in. So I just try to be grateful that it brings me joy continually every day. It's been over 5 years now. We just hit our 5-year anniversary on February 1st. So like 2 weeks ago. And I still love it every day. Like every day when my alarm wakes me up in the morning, I'm like excited and eager to start writing. So like it just, in that way, it's had like the most profound impact on my life.
Is it like being on a roller coaster then? A really pleasant feeling? I mean, just this whole process, like the poser said, seems really huge, and you're in the middle of everything, doing everything, and then you stop and think, what kind of effect you're having on people in the world.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I get messages from people being like, the CRAM inspired me to vote for the first time, or the CRAM inspired me to get involved with a charity or a protest or start my own, or anything like that, or even just people telling me like stories about them reading every day, like after like sports practice in the morning, and that they like refresh their emails waiting to get the CRAM. Like it literally like makes me want to cry, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's the kind of thing that parts of it are very solo, because I'm writing every morning in my room by myself. And then parts of it, a big part of it is very communal, because it really is the audience and the readers and the connection that we've been able to have. So then whenever I'm reminded of that and actually realize that there are real people out there reading it every day, it blows my mind.
The pandemic obviously is a terrible, terrible thing, but do you think the CRAM would have been different if there wasn't a pandemic?
I mean, I will say CRAM this book wouldn't have existed. I think it would have existed eventually, because it was something I was really bent on wanting to accomplish. But I don't like, maybe it would have just started happening now because I'm graduated and don't have anything going on the next few months. And then that's like an entirely different thing. So I think it really did change the trajectory of it in that sense.
Interesting. Please ask questions. We've got a few more minutes, and we have another question. I'm looking forward to reading your book. You mentioned you wanted to be a writer since you were young. Do you see yourself writing nonfiction or fiction in the future?
It's a good question. I mean, when I was little, I really wanted to be a fiction writer. I actually wrote like a 400-page book when I was like 11 or something. It was a fiction book, and I was like, I wanted to get it published. Like I was so into it, and I spent like a year editing it and everything. And then the CRAM came along, and I actually absolutely like loathed nonfiction writing, like hated it with a passion, because the only sort of nonfiction writing I had done was like writing essays on like biology or something for elementary school classes, which was fine, but it's not exactly like the kind of thing that makes you be like, I want to be a journalist and do nonfiction writing, because there was this more stilted aspect to it. But as soon as I realized I could actually use writing as a tool for activism and for change making, then I was just like all on board with the nonfiction thing. And now I love it. So that's a hard question to answer, because I mean, I hope that I'll have the opportunity in the future to continue writing and maybe to have another book come out. I definitely, I think that there's a lot more to be said and a lot more to be accomplished when it comes to giving the background to the current events shaping the world today. I think that I did my best to, so to speak, cram it all into one book, but there's always so much more to be said, because there are constantly new things happening. Like we had to update CRAM this book, like really last minute, because I had a whole section on the war in Afghanistan, and then the US pulled out of Afghanistan. And then I had to like add a whole page to that and be like, okay, all of this new stuff just happened. So the world is changing so quickly. So I definitely am super interested in nonfiction, but one day again, I would want to pursue fiction writing as well.
Okay, I think you should have sold the other book with your child in a package deal. Next time.
It's very different.
Okay, we got some more questions here. What topic was the hardest to write about in Cram This Book for you?
I would say the hardest topic to write about was definitely the Israel-Palestine section for so many reasons. I think like the most obvious reason is that it really is probably the most controversial thing written about in Cram This Book. And because it is so ongoing and like so muddled and complex, it was really hard for me to figure out how I wanted to go about writing about it. I knew that it was important to write about because it's so muddled and complex. But I think it's the longest chapter in the book as well, because most of the chapters I tried to keep pretty short and concise, but this was one that I felt like I really needed to give the full story of what was happening, because it spans many decades too. And there are many different things that were really crucial to understanding what's going on with the situation today. So that was a really difficult, kind of like hefty chapter to write about. And it was definitely the kind of thing too, where I wanted to make sure I was doing justice to what's going on in an accurate and balanced way, while also not ignoring the very real human rights crisis at the heart of it.
How difficult, I mean, obviously we're all human beings and we're all biased in our own ways, but to be unbiased without having any, projecting any kind of leaning either way, was that difficult for you to do, or did that come relatively easily?
I feel like it was easy in the sense that I was always very like, in my head, I was like, it has to be non-biased, because if someone happens to read through the book and there's even one sentence that seems to have some sort of slant, then the whole book is like disregarded. So I didn't want that to happen, where there would be anyone who would read the book wanting to be informed and educated and then feel like something really rubbed them the wrong way. And that also doesn't mean that I try to kind of like appeal to everyone and be like, oh, well, some people say climate change is real, but others say it's fake, because that's not factual. Like the science supports that it is real. So I didn't want to also both sides issues at all, but I also wanted to make sure that nobody was alienated by it.
Wow. Good answer.
Thank
All
you.
Right. Anonymous attendee wanted to know, was there anything about the process of creating this book that was especially gratifying or surprising to you?
I think what I personally got out of it was like the most gratifying. Like, one, I learned so much about the actual world and about these events, because there are things that you know about and understand, like from school or from whatever, like the Vietnam War, but it's very different when I actually start researching it, start speaking to experts and journalists who covered the Vietnam War, and actually start like diving deep into it. Like that's a very different thing, like just to use the Vietnam War as an example. So I found myself learning a lot about the world throughout the process of writing this book. And then I also learned so much about the actual publishing process too, which was definitely like my favorite part of it, because like, again, as someone who their whole life has wanted to be a writer, actually like seeing up close and personal how it works, like working with a literary agent and pitching editors and getting a book deal, and then working with an editor who lived across the country from me, and having to like respond to like feedback and like be on deadlines, and then work with copy editors and work with an illustrator and work with designers. Like there's all these different elements to it that I had like no idea about, that just was constantly so exciting for me to learn.
What was it like, that back and forth with editors? I mean, I'm sure you did an extensive push and pull type of thing. If you can just expand a little more on that process for you, what it was like.
Yeah, it actually was like a really amazing process before, and I like mentioned this in the acknowledgements of the book, but before working with my editor, Talia, the only people who had ever like actually read my writing outside of school and given advice on it were my parents. So I was really unsure of how the process of working with someone who was pretty much a stranger, like when we first started working together, would be. It actually was like so incredible. I don't think there was ever a piece of advice that I was like, no, I disagree with this. Like I felt like our conversations and brainstorming sessions, I feel like always made the book stronger and made it better. And that was also like really important to me to have different perspectives. So it wasn't just like, this is clearly a book that this person wrote. Like I wanted it to feel like something that, having a very signature and like identifiable voice also felt like, okay, this is literally just like straight up giving the background to what's happened without any sort of like strong perspective or tilt.
Interesting. And then we have one more question, then I'll have one more question after that. One viewer wanted to know, what are your plans for Harvard?
So I was fortunate enough to be accepted for the class of 2026. I would love to major in government and really kind of delve into the political science space more, because that's something that I feel like I just have so much more to learn about. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to start there in August.
All right. And my last question for you, and then we'll let everybody go, is down the road, let's say 10 years from now, where's Olivia Seltzer going to be? Where would you like her to be?
I would really love to have fulfilled my dreams with the CRAM of expanding it, like I mentioned earlier. But I like to kind of have like a bucket list item of things I want to do throughout my life that I'm sort of interested in. So I'm potentially interested in going to law school and pursuing human rights law. I'm definitely interested in wanting to write more. And then of course the CRAM, like that's my favorite thing I do in life. And I have such a strong belief in it. So 10 years from now, I don't know where I'll be, but I hope that I've gotten to accomplish at least one of those things.
I think you will. We actually have one more question because it's a great question for the future here. So I'm going to ask this and then we'll sign off. What would be your advice to other young people who want to make a difference, but don't really know where to start? That's a great question.
That is a really great question. I would say the biggest thing, because I was there, like I read I'm Malala when I was 9 years old, and I was like, oh my God, like she's amazing. I'm so inspired by her. But so I really wanted to do something that would make the world a better place, but I really had no idea what to do. I think really my best advice would be to find a cause that you're really passionate about, because I think it's easy for people who care about the world to want to make a difference in every aspect. And that's really tricky to do. Like, I know I'm very passionate about all sorts of things. I'm very passionate about women's rights. I'm passionate about immigration rights. I'm passionate about racial inequity. Like the list goes on. But one person can't solve every issue in the world. And I don't think one person should try. I think it's really important to focus on one cause. So find that one cause that you really care about. And then also think about something that really brings you joy, that you love doing in life anyway. Whether that, for me, that was writing, or maybe it's you have a sports team you're part of, or maybe you love going to the beach, or whatever it is you enjoy doing. Maybe you really love posting on TikTok or anything. It really could be anything in the world. And then actually figure out a way of using that passion to make a difference and to make the world a better place. And I think that splitting it up sort of into those two questions of like, what do I care about like wanting to fix? And then also, what do I care about in my personal life that I can use to help And even just spreading awareness about a cause is like that's the whole thing that the CRAM does. And I think that's a really important step that a lot of people maybe tend to like overlook.
Olivia Seltzer, thank you very much for joining us. Aurora Dominguez, thank you very much for hosting. You're an amazing host. Thank you. Everyone,
thank you so much.
Everyone, please buy CRAM this book. Please go to chaucersbooks.com. And Olivia, we hope to see you for an in-store signing sometime next month. Okay?
Definitely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice evening. Good night.
Thank you. Bye. Good night.